The last thing she felt was the splintered wood of the door pressing against her back, a final, rough goodbye from the only home she had ever known. Then, nothing. Just the vast, empty cold of a world that had no place for her. The door clicked shut, the sound as sharp and final as a bone snapping in the frost. Behind it was her Aunt Morwen, a woman whose heart had shriveled like a dried apple, her face a permanent mask of disapproval. Inside was the meager warmth of a fire she was no longer welcome to share. Outside, the twilight bled across the hard-pan dirt of the town's only street, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and iron grey. Maeve, all of 17 years, stood shivering, clutching a canvas sack that held everything she now owned in the world, a worn leather-bound book filled with her father's elegant script, a small, hard wheel of cheese wrapped in cloth, a flint and steel, and a tattered wool blanket. At her feet, 2 tiny goat kids, no bigger than house cats, huddled against her legs, their bleats thin and frightened in the immense silence. She was an orphan, a pariah, a girl full of what her aunt called dangerous notions, and now, she was an exile. The windows of the other houses were hollow eyes, their faint yellow light offering no solace, only the cold indifference of people who look and choose not to see. They had watched her parents waste away, had watched her aunt's bitterness grow, and now they watched her be cast out into a night that promised a killing frost. She looked down at the 2 small, trembling lives at her feet, then at the single, heavy book in her sack. This was her inheritance, 2 hungry mouths and a collection of ideas deemed worthless by everyone she knew. How does a girl with nothing but 2 kids and a book survive a winter that would break a grown man? How does the thing they scorn you for become the one thing that can save them? To understand the steel in her spine, you must first understand the fire that forged it. You have to go back. You have to see the world not through the town's hardened eyes, but through hers. You have to feel the weight of the book in your own hands and see the world as a place of hidden principles and quiet wonders, a place that could be understood, not just endured. Her story is not just about survival, it is about the stubborn, defiant act of creation in the face of annihilation. It is a testament to the idea that the knowledge others discard might be the very seed from which a future grows, a future they cannot yet imagine. We watch her now, a small, lonely figure turning her back on the town, her face set toward the dark, rising shapes of the rocky mesas that clawed at the edge of the sky. She did not know where she was going. She only knew she could not stay. The cold was a physical thing, a predator stalking her, and with every step she took away from that closed door, its teeth sank a little deeper. The goats, which she had named Asta and Rue, stumbled along, their tiny hooves making almost no sound on the frozen ground. They were the last of her mother's line, a hardy breed that gave sweet, rich milk, a living link to a love that now felt as distant as a star. To keep them alive, she first had to keep herself alive. And to do that, she had to remember everything her parents had ever taught her, the words in the book and the wisdom of the land, a strange and potent combination that the town, in its fear, had decided was a kind of poison. They were wrong. It was the only antidote she had. Her father had been a man of quiet observation, a geologist and botanist by training who had come west with a trunk full of books and a heart full of dreams, most of which had shattered against the harsh reality of this place. He saw the world in layers, in strata, in systems. He taught Maeve not just the names of the rocks but the stories they told of pressure and time. He showed her how water moved, not just on the surface, but through the hidden veins of the earth. He would sit with her for hours, his long, ink-stained fingers tracing the diagrams in his book, explaining the principles of the arch, the importance of ventilation, the way the earth itself could be an insulator, breathing heat in the winter and coolness in the summer. Nature builds the strongest houses, Maeve, he would say, his voice a low rumble. We just have to learn to read her blueprints to her Aunt Morwen and the rest of the town. He was a fool, a man who stared at dirt and scribbled in notebooks while other men were branding cattle. Her mother, however, had been his perfect counterpoint. She was a woman of the earth, not of the page. Her knowledge was tactile, instinctual. She knew which plants could soothe a fever, which roots were sweet and filling, and which mushrooms would bring a swift end. She taught Maeve the language of animals, the subtle shift in a goat's posture that spoke of illness, the twitch of an ear that signaled fear. Her hands, though calloused, were endlessly gentle as she showed Maeve how to milk, how to press the curd, how to salt the cheese that was their small, private currency. She was the land, and he was the map. Together, they gave Maeve a unique lens through which to see her world. But a wasting sickness had taken them both the winter before, a fever that her mother's herbs couldn't break and her father's books couldn't explain. Morwen, her mother's sister, took Maeve in, but it was an act of grim duty, not love. Morwen was a woman forged by hardship, who believed only in what she could hold, in the brutal pragmatism of survival. She distrusted the books, seeing them as the source of the dreamy impracticality that she blamed for her sister's death. "Your daddy filled your head with foolishness, and I won't have it poisoning this house," she'd snarled, her voice thick with a grief that had curdled into resentment. The goats, the book, the quiet way Maeve observed the world, it was all an affront to her, a painful reminder of the brother-in-law she never understood and the sister she had lost. The final straw had been a simple argument over a sick calf, Maeve suggesting a poultice from a recipe in her father's book, Morwen seeing it as a blasphemous rejection of tradition. The argument festered, and in a fit of rage and grief, Morwen had cast her out. Now, that past was a ghost at her back. The immediate reality was the biting air and the growing weakness in her legs. The first night, she found a shallow overhang of rock, a mere scoop out of the hillside. It was poor shelter, but it broke the wind. She huddled with Asta and Rue pressed against her, their small, warm bodies a comfort against the profound, soul-crushing loneliness. She shared her small wheel of cheese with them, letting them lick the salt from her fingers, her own stomach clenching with a hunger she ignored. Sleep was a fleeting, shivering thing, punctuated by the cry of a distant coyote and the chattering of her own teeth. The next days were a blur of desperate survival. She used her mother's knowledge to find water, chipping away at the ice of a frozen creek until she reached the slow, dark current beneath. She dug for cattail roots in the marshy lowlands, her fingers numb and clumsy in the frozen mud. She knew from her father's book that the inner bark of a pine tree could be eaten, a starchy, resinous meal that was better than nothing, but only just. She was a ghost haunting the edges of the world, growing thinner, weaker. A week after she was cast out, a storm blew in from the north, a true blizzard that erased the world in a wall of white. She was caught in the open, the wind screaming, the snow blinding her. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She stumbled on, dragging the kids, who were now too weak to walk, carrying one tucked inside her coat. She fell into a deep drift, the snow consuming her, and for a moment, she considered letting it. It would be a soft, quiet end. But then she felt the faint, warm pulse of the kid against her chest, and a primal stubbornness flared within her. She would not let this last piece of her mother die. She fought her way out of the drift, crawling on hands and knees, and by sheer, blind luck, she stumbled into the mouth of a narrow fissure in the rock face, a dark slash hidden by a curtain of snow-dusted juniper. It was a cave. It was not large, at first. Just a dark opening, smelling of damp stone and ancient silence. But it was out of the wind. She collapsed inside, huddling with the goats, the three of them a single, shivering mass of desperation. When the storm finally broke 2 days later, Maeve was weak but alive. And as the pale, winter light filtered into the opening, she began to truly see her discovery. The fissure opened into a wider chamber, deeper than she could have imagined. A steady, resonant drip-drip-drip from the ceiling told her there was water. Holding her breath, she followed the sound into the deeper dark, her hands trailing along the cold, smooth stone wall. The air grew warmer, not by much, but the life-sapping chill receded. It was the earth's own warmth, a constant, steady temperature that her father had once described to her, reading from his book by firelight. The ground sloped gently downwards. Her foot kicked something, and she knelt, her fingers exploring the floor. It wasn't just rock, it was deep, packed clay, cool and pliable. And then she saw it, a faint, almost imperceptible column of light far above, a natural chimney reaching for the sky. Ventilation. Insulation. Water. Space. It wasn't just a shelter. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, clear as a bell, nature builds the strongest houses. This was a blueprint. This was not a temporary refuge, it could be a home. A stable. A fortress against the winter that had tried to kill her. The idea, so audacious and overwhelming, did not frighten her. It filled her with a fierce, burning purpose. Here, in the heart of the stone, away from the judging eyes of the town, she would not just survive. She would build. She would create a sanctuary for the only family she had left. The work began with a desperate, frantic energy that soon settled into a slow, sustainable rhythm. Her tools were meager, her hands, a flat, sharp-edged rock she found near the entrance, and the small garden trowel her mother had used for her herbs, which she'd had the presence of mind to tuck into her sack. The first task was to define the space. She chose a section of the main chamber that was naturally level and close to the freshwater seep. Using the sharp rock, she scored a line in the clay floor, marking the perimeter of what would become the goat pen. Then, the digging started. It was brutal, back-breaking labor. She would hack at the dense clay with her rock, loosening it chunk by chunk, then scoop the heavy earth onto her blanket with the trowel and drag it to a deeper part of the cave, dumping it to build up a low wall on the far side. Each day was a cycle of hack, scoop, drag, dump. Her hands, soft from a life indoors, were soon a mass of blisters that broke, bled, and hardened into thick calluses. Her back and shoulders screamed with a constant, deep ache. But with every load of earth she moved, the pen grew. It was a slow transformation, measured in inches, not feet. As she dug down, she began to innovate, applying the principles her father had taught her. She didn't just create a pit, she carefully sloped the floor towards a low point, a shallow trench she dug to channel any moisture away from the main living area, ensuring the bedding would stay dry. She remembered a diagram in his book about buttressing, and she left thick pillars of undisturbed earth at the corners of the pen to ensure the stability of the walls she was carving from the cave itself. After weeks of this relentless excavation, she had a space 10 feet by 10 feet, sunk 3 feet into the cave floor. The earthen walls were solid, the floor sloped for drainage. Now, she needed fencing and bedding. She ventured out of the cave, gathering fallen branches of juniper and scrub oak, dragging them back to her sanctuary one by one. She used the sharp rock to strip them of smaller twigs and notch the ends. Then, using cordage she painstakingly twisted from the fibers of yucca plants, a skill her mother had taught her for mending, she lashed the branches together, creating sturdy panels. She sank the upright posts deep into the clay floor, packing the earth around them until they were solid and immovable. She wove smaller, more flexible branches between the posts, creating a tight, secure fence. The final touch was the bedding. For days, she gathered great armfuls of dry grasses and fallen leaves from sheltered, sun-drenched gullies where the snow had melted, carrying them in her blanket back to the cave. She filled the pen with a thick, soft layer of insulation, a fragrant mattress that would keep the goats warm and dry. She even built a small, raised platform for them to sleep on, a miniature loft made of flat stones and woven branches, keeping them off the coldest part of the floor. The cave was transformed. It was no longer just a hole in the ground. It was a marvel of subterranean engineering, a warm, dry, and safe home. Asta and Rue, who had grown stronger on a diet of foraged bark and winter brush, explored their new home with curious nudges and happy bleats, their contentment a balm to Maeve's weary soul. She had done it. She had built a life underground. For months, her world was the cave and the surrounding mesas. Her only companions were the goats. She talked to them constantly, her voice a low murmur that filled the quiet of their stone sanctuary. One day, while tracking a game trail, she noticed something unusual, a snare, expertly made, but old and empty. A few days later, she saw a thin curl of smoke rising from a distant, hidden canyon. She was not entirely alone. The discovery was both thrilling and terrifying. One afternoon, as she was scraping lichen from a rock for the goats, a shadow fell over her. She looked up to see a man, old and weathered as the landscape itself. His face was a road map of wrinkles, his beard the color of dirty snow, and his eyes, sharp and clear, missed nothing. He held no weapon, just a string of rabbits in one hand. He didn't look surprised to see her. "That's good for what ails em," he said, his voice a dry rasp, nodding at the lichen. "Keeps the worms out," Maeve scrambled back, her heart hammering against her ribs. He held up a hand, a gesture of peace. "Name's Hemlock. I trap these hills." He looked past her, his gaze analytical, toward the cleverly hidden entrance to her cave. "Been seeing your signs. You walk light. Don't spook the games." He took a step closer, his eye scanning her work, the neat piles of firewood, the rack of drying herbs near the entrance. He sniffed the air. "Goat," he stated, not as a question. Maeve simply nodded, unable to speak. "Figured," he said. "Heard old Morwen threw her niece out. Didn't figure you to last a week." His eyes weren't filled with pity, but with a kind of grudging respect. He invited himself to her cave, and for some reason, she let him. He walked through the space, his eyes taking in every detail, the drainage trench, the ventilated chimney, the sturdy pens, the thick, clean bedding. He ran a hand over the woven fence. He looked at the goats, who were healthy and bright-eyed. Finally, he looked at Maeve. "Your mama teach you this?" Maeve found her voice. "My mother taught me the animals. My father taught me the earth." Hemlock grunted, a sound of profound approval. "She teach you good." He did too. He saw the small clay pots where she was letting milk culture, the small, pale wheels of cheese wrapped in cloth, curing in the cool, dry air. He pointed at one. "Trade you for that." Rabbits for cheese. It was the first time in months anyone had seen what she was doing and recognized its value. It was more than a trade, it was an acknowledgement. She was no longer just a desperate survivor. She was a creator, an artisan. The quiet trapper, the man they called Old Man Hemlock, became her first and only bridge to the world she had left behind. Hemlock became a regular visitor. He never stayed long, and they spoke little, but a comfortable understanding grew between them. He brought her things she couldn't find or make, a block of salt for the goats, a proper knife, a small sack of cornmeal. In return, she gave him cheese. He started taking extra wheels with him on his rare trips into town for supplies. At first, no one would buy it. "That's the cave girl's cheese," they'd say, a sneer in their voices. The name Cave Woman had stuck, a cruel moniker for the strange girl who had vanished into the hills. But Hemlock was persistent. He didn't sell it at the main mercantile. Instead, he traded it to the people on the fringes, just like him. A new family with too many children and not enough money. A widow who did mending for a pittance. These were the people who, out of necessity, were willing to try it. And they discovered a secret. The cheese was extraordinary. It was rich and tangy, with a clean, herbal flavor from the varied diet of wild things Maeve fed her goats. It was nothing like the bland, crumbly cheese from the town's half-starved cows. Word began to spread in whispers. The widow told the blacksmith's wife. The new family shared a piece with their neighbor. Slowly, cautiously, the town's perception began to shift. The name Cave Woman was still spoken, but now it held a note of grudging curiosity, of myth. They pictured a wild, half-mad creature living in a filthy hole in the ground, yet somehow producing this clean, perfect food. The contradiction fascinated and unsettled them. Maeve knew nothing of this. Her world remained the cave. Her flock was growing. Asta had given birth to 2 healthy kids, and her herd now numbered 4. Her days were full, a peaceful routine of milking, foraging, cheese-making, and constantly improving her subterranean home. She was content. She had her work, her animals, and her solitude. She did not know that her quiet, underground life was about to intersect with the town above in a way that would change everything. From her isolated vantage point, she could not see the sky turning a malevolent shade of steel, nor feel the prelude to the cold that was coming to test them all. The winter began with an ice storm. A full day of freezing rain coated every surface in a thick, clear sheath. Branches, heavy with ice, snapped with reports like rifle shots. Then the temperature plummeted, and the snow began. It snowed for 3 days without stopping, a thick, silent deluge that buried the world. When it finally ceased, a terrible cold descended, a deep, dry, Arctic chill that settled into the very bones of the earth. In the town, it was a catastrophe. The livestock, kept in wooden barns with chinks in the walls, began to die. The water troughs were frozen solid blocks of ice. The hay, stored in lofts, was damp from the ice storm and froze into useless, moldy clumps. The cows, with their higher need for fodder and lower tolerance for extreme cold, went first. Then the sheep. The sounds of panicked, lowing animals faded into an awful silence. The town's supply of milk, butter, and meat vanished in the space of a week. At first, it was an inconvenience. Then, it became a crisis. The children grew pale and listless. The old people began to cough, their resistance lowered by the meager diet of dried beans and flour. A quiet, desperate fear gripped the community. In her cave, Maeve and her flock were untouched. The geothermal heat kept the temperature inside well above freezing. The seep provided a constant supply of fresh water. She had spent the autumn stockpiling food, dragging in great bundles of dried brush and leaves, which she had stored in a separate chamber. Her goats were warm, well-fed, and producing milk. One morning, Hemlock appeared at her cave, his face grim. He told her what was happening. "They're starving," he said simply. "The children are getting sick. No milk. No fat." Maeve listened, her heart aching for the children she didn't know, in the town that had rejected her. A few days later, a small group of men appeared at her cave entrance. They were the town elders, their faces gaunt and etched with worry. They stood there awkwardly, their hats in their hands, their breath pluming in the frigid air. They looked into the cave and saw not a filthy den, but a clean, orderly, and miraculous pocket of life in a world of frozen death. Their leader, a stern man named Abram, finally spoke. We need your help," he stammered. "We need milk. For the children. We'll pay." Maeve looked at their desperate faces, the faces of the men who had stood by and watched as she was cast out. Every instinct for self-preservation screamed at her to refuse. But then she thought of the children, and she saw the faces of her own parents in her mind. She thought of her father's belief in systems, in connection, and her mother's deep, instinctual well of compassion. She gave a single, sharp nod. "I will give you milk," she said, her voice clear and strong. "But not for pay." For the children it was an act of grace they did not deserve, and in their shame, they knew it. Every morning for the rest of that terrible winter, a man from the town would make the trek to her cave with empty pails and return with full ones. The milk, rich and life-giving, was distributed to the families with young children first. It saved them. It stopped the wasting sickness and brought color back to their cheeks. Maeve became a legend in her own time. The woman they had scorned as a witch, a mad girl playing with dirt and books, was now their salvation. When the great thaw finally came, it was like the world was being reborn. As the snow melted and the first green shoots appeared, the town's relationship with Maeve was irrevocably changed. They no longer saw her as an outcast. They saw her as a miracle worker, a woman who held a deeper knowledge than they could comprehend. They came to her, not as beggars this time, but as students. They asked about the goats, about the cave, about the way she seemed to understand the secrets of the earth. She taught them. She shared the principles from her father's book and the practical wisdom from her mother. She showed them how to build warmer, smarter shelters for their new animals, how to find forage in the lean months, how to work with the land instead of fighting against it. One evening, a lone figure appeared at her cave. It was Aunt Morwen. She looked older, smaller, the bitterness in her face softened by a deep and painful humility. She stood for a long time, just watching Maeve milk a goat. The little ones. They would have died, Morwen said, her voice barely a whisper. Maeve said nothing, just continued her work. Morwen took a shaky breath. "I was wrong," she said, the words costing her everything. "I was wrong about the books." It was not a full apology, but it was enough. It was the closing of a circle. Maeve didn't move back to the town. The cave was her home. But she was no longer an exile. She had woven herself back into the community, not by conforming, but by being stubbornly, brilliantly herself. She proved that the things that make us strange, the passions that isolate us, can, in the crucible of crisis, become the gifts that save us all. Here is what I think. We all have a kind of wilderness that we are cast into at some point in our lives. We are all, in some way, handed a legacy of knowledge that the world around us might not value. It might be a book of ideas, a set of skills, a quiet way of seeing the world that doesn't fit in. And when you are standing in that cold, lonely place, the temptation is to abandon that legacy, to try and be what the world wants you to be. But the story of the cave woman is a different kind of lesson. It teaches us that resilience is not just the act of enduring. It is the act of building. It is taking the very things you were condemned for and using them as the blueprints for your own survival, and perhaps, for the survival of others. Your cave is waiting. It is that place where your unique knowledge can be honed, where your strange ideas can be nurtured. What you build in that secret, lonely place, with nothing but your own hands and your own heart, might just be the thing that warms the whole world when the cold comes.